Previously on Alan Wake.
Okay, thank you.
Cauldron Lake is a special place.
Alice? Alice?
My name is Alan Wake, and I'm a writer.
Alan Wake? Oh, God! I am your biggest fan.
I came to Bright Falls with my wife, Alice. I was a successful writer.
What?
But that was a long time ago.
I thought maybe you could write here.
Just don't! I don't want to hear it! God damn it, Alice!
Alice was taken by a monster called the Dark Presence.
I will tell you what to do.
The Dark Presence made me write a horror story that came to life.
Oh, what the fuck? It's not what I
It wore
expected.
the face of an old woman. Behind the mask was pure darkness. The story would make it strong enough to escape the dark place. But there was a weapon to use against the Dark Presence. A light switch. The clicker. To save Alice, I needed to enter Cauldron Lake. Dive deeper.
Right, this is the guy that lost his mind.
I
get it.
resurfaced in the dark place.
You for your girl, you reckon? Interesting.
I fought the Dark Presence and took control of my story. I changed the ending.
Send your one again, Flash. We'll have a
I
look too.
sacrificed myself so Alice could go
Hello.
free. Now, I'm trapped in the dark place.
Alan?
This nightmare has only just begun.
Alan?
The official
Next
recap.
on Alan Wake.
Man, look at the graphic increase. I'll watch two. I think Flash sent me a really good recap, a bit longer, more in depth. I didn't. It's not. Oh, here we go. I think
A sequel
That
to
was still
Alan Wake
good.
once seemed impossible, with the original Alan Wake launching in 2010 and becoming the sort of cult classic that is fondly remembered by fans but typically not expanded upon in an industry obsessed with mega hits. However, after 13 years, one quasi-sequel and one DLC tie-in, Remedy is finally returning to its well of inky darkness and releasing the sequel, Alan Wake 2,
Gammy?
which shifts into full-on survival horror, introduces a second playable character, and continues to build on the Remedy Connected Universe's elaborate lore. Whether you simply want a refresher of what's happened already, you need a complete
Wait,
introduction
what?
to the world of Alan Wake, or
didn't think that
you
was
just
gonna
want
be
to
happening.
see how your favorite fan
Be a
theories
typewriter
are
on
doing
vacation?
before you
Yeah,
dive
what?
into the
I
sequel.
wanna play
Is
the first
everything
one.
that's happened in the Alan Wake story so far.
this is not what I thought.
The story of Alan Wake kicks off in the Pacific Northwest in 2010 in the ominously named Bright Falls, Washington, a logging and mining-oriented town that harbors a dark secret. For Alan and his wife Alice, however, it's meant to be a safe haven for the ever-disgruntled and writer's-blocked Alan to rest his head and take some time away from the hustle and bustle of New York City and his life as a best-selling crime author. Alan and Alice arrive at their secluded bird-leg cabin, which sits by its lonesome
That
atop
does look pretty
Cauldron
nice.
Lake. Though the views are incredible, things take a turn for the worst on the first night of their stay. The hot-headed Alan storms out of the cabin in a huff when he discovers Alice brought a typewriter with the hope that Alan might find more success writing given his change of scenery. Rather rudely, he leaves his nyctophobic, that
How
means
dare
afraid
she
of
bring a typewriter? Disgusting. Unlimited. Thank you very much for the gifted
the dark
subby.
wife
Thank
alone
you.
in the creepy cabin during a power
Oh, your first
outage
gifted
and
sub, thank
immediately
you.
lives to regret it as Alice is attacked by a dark presence just seconds later. Alan rushes in but manages only to witness her be pulled into the infinite darkness of Cauldron Lake. Suddenly feeling heroic, he jumps in after her. The next thing he knows, Alan awakens from behind the wheel of a crashed car, alone in the woods of Bright Falls other than a strange apparition clad in a diving suit that acts as Alan's part-time guiding light. Don't worry, we'll get back to this. Alan soon discovers he's missing a week of time. To make matters worse, he starts to find pages of a manuscript he supposedly wrote, and the events described on the pages
That's actually something I would do. No, seriously, I want to get away from streaming and bring a PC. Now, seriously, guys, I'm going on a holiday this time just for me, but I'm bringing my vlog camera, a phone, a laptop.
Begin coming to life. That would be fine if the author were writing about a good night's sleep or eating cake, but Alan's not so lucky. His story is a horror story, and soon axe-wielding maniacs, possessed construction trucks, and Hitchcockian birds all have it out for him. Eventually, he catches his breath and gets the attention of Sheriff Sarah Breaker, who delivers the bad news that Bird Lake Cabin hasn't existed for decades, and it was destroyed by a volcanic eruption, leaving Alan's head hurting more than when he crashed his car. Soon after, his loud-mouthed but endlessly faithful literary agent Barry Wheeler shows up in town to defend his client, as Alan's gains the attention of local authorities, what with the whole crashing cars and misplacing wives routine. Alan spends the next several days in Bright Falls, being pulled ceaselessly farther down a rabbit hole of Stephen King-like oddities. Though Breaker is cautiously helpful toward Alan, others are much less intentioned. The FBI shows up, led by an alcohol-abusing special agent named Nightingale, who seems to assume Alan's guilt before he even crosses the town's border. After relentlessly evading both him and the shadowy monsters, shaped like townsfolk called the Taken, Alan meets up with a local who claims to have kidnapped his wife and is holding her for ransom. As it turns out, the self-proclaimed kidnapper is just a crony for Dr. Emil Hartman, a local therapist who specializes, or more accurately preys on, artists such as painters, musicians, video game developers, and writers. Either by temptation or corruption, Hartman seeks to utilize the Dark Presence for his own good, but just as he acted as the marionette to that kidnapper, it seems the Dark Presence was pulling his strings too. Hartman is attacked in a supernatural assault on the mental health facility, and Alan barely makes it out alive. Before he left the facility, Alan was able to get to know Tor and Odin Anderson, the two old-timers from town who know a lot more than they were willing to let on in front of the doctor. The Anderson brothers direct Alan to their farm, where they promise the writer some much-needed answers. There, with Barry, Alan begins to understand the nature of the town's monster. The Dark Presence lurking in Bright Falls is empowered by art, and it manipulates artists to grow itself stronger through the worlds they imbue with purpose, like a song by the Andersons under their moniker The Old Gods of Asgard, or a story like that written by Alan during his missing week, during which time the Dark Presence served as something like his evil editor. By doing this, the Dark Presence is able to grow its influence beyond its domain, known as the Dark Place, a subjective supernatural realm that can appear different to different people, but is never the type of place one would want to land in. Alan seeks out the Lady of the Light, a spot-on callback to Twin Peaks' Log Lady, who understands better than anyone in town what exactly is going on. If it's not yet weird enough for you, here's where things really start to unravel. The Lady of the Light, Cynthia Weaver, explains to Alan that she's seen what is happening before, back in the 1970s when it was a poet named Thomas Zane who was manipulated by the Dark Presence. In that case, the darkness kidnapped and eventually took on the appearance of his lover, Barbara Jagger. Zane stumbled his way to a conclusion that perhaps could have rescued Jagger and instead lost her for good. Now it's Alan's turn to try and save his love from the same cruel fate. The ghostly diver Alan has been seeing turns out to be Zane, who has been trying to guide Alan to a happier ending than he got himself. To that end, Weaver explains to Alan that Zane left behind a shoebox specifically for Alan to find years later. In it rests the clicker, a portion of a broken light switch Alan used to play with as a child. To Alan and players alike, the reveal becomes a headache-inducing time loop. How did Zane write into reality this clicker that comes from Alan's time as a kid? Or did he not do it at all? Did Alan write Zane into existence? It's the story's best chicken and egg scenario in a basket full of fan theories and lingering mysteries. And not to get too far ahead, but fans are still trying to make sense of it today. However the clicker got there, Alan comes to understand his purpose. He must correct Zane's wrongs, which led to his partner's demise, in order to save Alice. Alan takes the clicker and after a long march through hell, finally comes face to face with the Dark Presence, once more wearing Jagger's likeness. Alan understands that a horror story requires sacrifice and balance. The writer can't create the happy ending they may want. It doesn't make narrative sense, and that allows the strangely art-obsessed Dark Presence to prey on those who get greedy, as Alan feels Zane did back in the 70s. To improve on Zane's unintentionally tragic conclusion, Alan writes a new ending to the story.
Must have been a really long
game. He thrusts the clicker into the black heart of Barbara Jagger and turns it on, sending a burst of magical light scorching through the monster. She is defeated, but not entirely. Instead, it's enough to create an opening for Alice to escape the dark presence. She emerges from the depths of Cauldron Lake and swims to shore shaken, but otherwise seemingly okay despite having spent over a week
real
in the
love,
dark
sacrificing
place.
for his
Alan
woman.
makes his much-needed sacrifice, submitting himself to the dark place in place of Alice. In doing so, Zane informs Alan that a doppelganger, whose name can't be heard over a scratching sound that is formed when Zane says it,
You keep
thus
telling
earning
yourself
him the
that,
name Mr. Scratch, will take Alan's place while Alan is away from the physical world from which he came. Alan then sits and prepares to write his exit in a story titled Return. The original game ends this way, though through 2 DLC chapters we see Alan growing stronger and becoming more familiar with the dark place. He can manipulate the world using words more intricately than before, bringing objects into existence that may aid him as he tries to escape the dark place. The mainline game ends with Alan stuck there, though players would get to explore it more in 2012 with the game's pseudo-sequel, Alan Wake's American Nightmare.
Oh, they had
in
another
American
one.
Nightmare, the theme of time loops returns, this time to tell a story of Alan further exploring the dark place, now presented as the fictional southwestern-looking town of Night Springs, which shares a name with the in-universe Twilight Zone-like TV series.
What is
All the
happening?
while, Alan's doppelganger, Mr. Scratch, seems to wreak
Is this
havoc
before
in
and
the
after
real
Silent
world.
Hill?
Alan's disappearance from his normal life and the surrounding events of Bright Falls have given birth to urban legends of a writer, Alan, who snapped and started killing people during a vacation with his wife. These rumors manifest as Mr. Scratch, who is basically Alan's evil twin that becomes a real-life serial killer. Through a series of looping events orchestrated by Mr. Scratch to keep Alan imprisoned forever in the dark place, Alan is aided by a trio of women, none of whom are Alice or even anyone familiar to the players, taking up residence at a motel, a theater, and an observatory. Each woman holds a different part of the solution to defeating Mr. Scratch, but the problem is they each keep dying,
The graphics
or
look like
Alan
they went
otherwise
really
fails in
downhill
his
on this
attempts
one.
to gather all he needs. His task is to create the perfect loop and save all of them so that they can survive long enough to help him too. After several spins through the time loop, Alan is able to keep all 3 women alive and collect everything he needs to
These women
defeat
looking
Mr.
pretty
Scratch.
seductive.
The twins have their showdown at the movie theater, where it's revealed that Alan's secret weapon was a movie Alice made that writes Mr. Scratch out of existence. It works, and Alan and Alice share a loving
wasn't? I was
embrace
gonna
at the
say, it
end of the
seems
game.
pretty, like-
However, a narrator's voice calls into question whether the events of American Nightmare really happened, or if they were just Alan's tortured daydreams while he remained stuck in the dark place. And in case you're wondering, Remedy does consider this game canon to the overarching story. That
They
was
look real
all
in
the
that.
Alan Wake story we were served for nearly a decade. Then, in 2020, Remedy's latest game at that time, Control, confirmed the speculation that Control and Alan Wake shared a universe in a DLC chapter called AWE, even elaborating with quite a lot of new material. Collectively, players now know these games and others yet to come as the Remedy Connected Universe. The name AWE officially refers to the idea of an altered world event, a term for the wild stuff that happens around the country that is then
Oh, real
investigated
cinematics
by
of
the Federal
gameplay.
Bureau of
Interesting.
Control, which is like if Scully and Mulder's X-Files division had proper funding. However, fans have reasonably joked that AWE also means Alan Wake expansion, since that's effectively what this DLC was. In AWE, we learn a lot about the current state of things in the modern Remedy Connected Universe
I've retained about 2% of this.
as it pertains to Alan Wake. For one, we learn that the events of Bright Falls, including Alan's saga, Zane's saga, and at least one more unspecified event that predates either of those, have been classified as altered world events. Some in-game hints also seem to suggest that Alan may have birthed the FBC itself through his abilities to alter reality through writing, though a summer 2023 chat with Remedy's Sam Lake clarified for us that this is not the case. We also learn that Alan is still missing in the present day, and that Alice is haunted by nightmarish images of her long-lost love. It's assumed by many that the wicked person she is seeing is actually Mr. Scratch, and that he was not truly
No, because
defeated in
when
the
I'm trying to concentrate, then I'll like see something in here and I'm like, and then I'll start randomly thinking like, what was I just thinking about then? I'm watching this and I randomly just thought about the DJI Osmo. I don't know why. It has no relevance to what we're watching. This is what's wrong with my brain. I'm watching this and I'm like, retain the information, retain the information. Oh, I wonder if they started to do my, like, and then next minute I was thinking about my dogs. I just cannot concentrate as hard as I'm trying. I'm thinking about random shit.
events of American Nightmare. We also learn that the FBC
I've been
investigated
diagnosed with it
Dr.
now,
Hartman's
but-
activities
well.
surrounding Cauldron Lake's special properties. Hartman eventually dove into the lake himself, but was consumed by the darkness, much like Barbara Jagger and others were, which led him to being imprisoned within the oldest house, the shape-shifting physical, but also metaphysical, headquarters for the FBC. As the entity, Hartman broke free, which led the FBC to retreat and seal up the wing of the oldest house that stored much of the Bright Falls.
That's about as much information as I'm retaining. I just clicked on somebody's stream. Hello?